Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond, Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Intersentia, and they publish some very detailed, well-established works which are of great assistance both within European law and within the English legal system itself. This particular book is about medical law effectively. The title is here, Professional Regulation and Medical Guidelines, with a long subtitle, The Real Forces Behind the Development of Evidence-Based Guidelines, been written by Friso Johannes Jansen. And as I say, it comes to us from the Intersentia press, based in Cambridge and of course on the continent. I said for my introduction to this book that this is an excellent statement for people who are involved more generally in medical law matters. Let's have a look at the book first of all. There it is. That's the front of the book. There's the spine, and then there's the back of the book. And I've borrowed some of the information from the blurb to assist me. There is at the back of the book some details. It's done in a slightly different way because it's from Intersentia. You have the details, the CV for Dr. Jansen at the back. He's a senior law lecturer at Birmingham City University and has a DPhil from Oxford. He's an experienced academic, and his particular focus is the interaction of science and law. Then you've got the index. It's a very short index at the back by page numbering. So you should be able to find what you're after. What you've then got is a very substantial amount of bibliography, which I found really very helpful, but there's a huge amount of work that's gone into this book, as you can probably see from the amount of the bibliography. Then of course it runs to under 250 pages. You've got paragraph numbering, which you can see at the sides, and you've got footnoting. Then if we go to the front of the book, you've got the front page there. Then you've got the blurb from Intersentia. There's a little dedication. We only review books that we like. I don't review books I don't like. The dedication is always very important because a lot of people are involved in these books, and I don't believe in writing about a book which I don't like. It's not fair, because there's a lot of work that goes into it. I've written a number of books and I don't like it if people criticise them. There's an acknowledgement section thanking people who've been able to help at the Centre for Socio-Legal Studies. Then you've got the contents section, which is quite detailed, the various types. He's taking a number of various examples, which I'll talk about in a minute, from various countries. You do have a very useful list of abbreviations, and then after that you can see the abbreviations there. There are, as with anything medical, there are lots of funny words, and there are lots of abbreviations. You may not necessarily quite know what they are like. There's the introduction. I'll start it off. It says this book is a socio-legal inquiry into the development of medical practice guidelines that provides insights into professional self-regulation and the black box of guideline making. We would all like to receive the best medical care possible. When we see our general practitioner, that's a GP, we expect to receive the best possible care independent of location. Now that's the start off of the book. It's professional regulation and medical guidelines. It's very relevant to what we've been going through with COVID-19 and the effect that's had on GP surgeries and, of course, generally speaking, on the hospitals. Because, again, he goes on to say, in response to increasing calls for the accountability of medical professionals, consensus-based medical practice guidelines were developed in the later part of the 70s in the USA, and they quickly spread to the Netherlands and England. And, of course, we are, at the moment, coming out of the pandemic, and we are going to have to start looking again very, very carefully at what the future holds for the way in which we develop the evidence-based guidelines in the future concerning regulation, and the way in which the medical profession, if I can put it that way, operates in the future, because a lot of lessons will be learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. As I say, the title I've given it is about medical guidelines and the future, and that's really what we're looking at, because the book has been written relatively recently. It came out as the pandemic was taking effect in February earlier this year. I'm recording this in the summer when the lockdown has ended. So what do I say about the book? We say this then: Dr. Jansen offers excellent evidence-based medical guidelines on what can be seen as an inescapable element of current medical practice. That is to say, how these guidelines should be developed in the future concerning, obviously, professional regulation. And it's a book which interrogates what causes these differences and similarities between guidelines and uncovers the mechanisms behind the development of medical practice guidelines. Because at the end of the day, I'm in a profession which is one of the most heavily regulated in Western Europe, and the medical profession likewise. Because we're in professions, they have to be regulated. The question then is, as the subtitle indicates, the real forces behind the development of evidence-based guidelines. In other words, the reasons why you should have them, and there's some evidence as to why they should be there. So what we've got are 4 case studies which are examined in this book, Professional Regulation of Medical Guidelines. They include the following areas. That's lower back pain and type 2 diabetes in England and the Netherlands. And they're used to provide a detailed empirical account of the development of medical guidelines. That, I think, is very helpful, because those 2 areas are important, very important areas for a very large number of patients. And of course, interviews with guideline developers have been combined by Dr. Jansen with a detailed analysis of guideline documents, which I think will be of help. And I certainly think a lot of GPs should know about this book, because, to be blunt about it, a lot of them need to know a little bit more about the law. It's not fair for me to say that in some ways, because I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, and obviously I have to know what a doctor does, but I'm not medically qualified. Doctors are not legally qualified, although some of them are. I've come across a few, bar school and so on, but generally speaking there aren't very many. But I do think they need to know more about the legal implications of what they do. And what we've got here, of course, are theories from science and technology studies, from institutional literature, group discussion making, decision making, and professional self-regulation, which the author has used to demonstrate how the development of guidelines can involve a series of what he calls subjective choices driven by economic, cultural, institutional, and political frames or frameworks. That, in fact, is where we're coming to with the guidelines, and what we're talking about here is the evidence-based guidelines themselves. So what we get here is medical evidence, which of course today is playing a more limited and nuanced role in guideline construction than we might have expected it to have, because this is a well-researched title from Intersentia, and it does shed light on the powers of experts and institutions to shape the governance of healthcare. And that's actually what you're getting, because we're looking ahead at the future. And I think after what we've all been through globally and in individual countries, there is a need for this, because the book here argues for greater transparency of the processes by which experts decide on the gold standard of care. And that is going to become very apparent at some future date when we have some sort of inquiry at whatever type. Certainly in England and Wales we'll have that, and of course the United Kingdom as a whole, and of course other countries will do the same. Not all, but some certainly. Let me conclude this review by saying that we consider that this book will be of interest to guideline developers, medical professionals, doctors, GPs and so on, policymakers, sociologists, and of course lawyers who are interested in the interaction of science and law, which is the basis of what Dr. Jansen's treatise is about. He provides us with rich empirical data into what is an often opaque and probably little understood world of rulemaking from the experts. As I've said before, I think the word transparency is the thing that really comes out of this, because that's what we're going to have in the post-COVID world. So I'd like to thank him very much for what he's done. I think it's important coming at the time that it does come, because the date of publication is cited as at the 3rd of February 2020, and I'm recording this in July. So I'd like to thank him very much. One quick look at the book again. There it is. There's the spine, and then there's the stuff on the back. Just opening it in the middle. Guidelines in the Netherlands and England. Now you can see the structure. You've got paragraph numbering. You've got a conclusion, which I always like. That does help because it brings everything together. You've got the footnoting as well, and you can see their implications. The book itself, you can see, probably can't really read the text, but it's actually quite easy to read. It's not a difficult book, because whilst you've got a very large number of bibliographical references, the work itself is actually, as to be expected from a D.Phil at Oxford, it's very well written. So thank you to Dr. Jansen. I imagine it's probably Jansen or Jansen. And I'd like to thank Intersentia as well for sending a book to us for review. It's well worth looking at post-COVID. Thank you. Bye-bye.